To you all, and a warm welcome to this first plenary session of the 12th World Congress Sport Law. First and foremost, let me explain how this session will be managed. The intention is that we have three keynote speakers who will speak for 20 minutes each, and that hopefully will allow questions from the floor for 10 minutes immediately after each speaker. So please prepare your questions. You will see microphones around the room, and if you can make sure that you announce your name and your affiliation before your question, that will be appreciated. But I'm really keen to encourage active interaction here with the speakers. The second point I wanted to mention to you is the theme of this session, which is physical activity for young people. Rarely has this subject been more important. It is at the heart of this Congress, and indeed at the heart of the 2009 IOC Congress. For whilst many of us work with people who are active in sport, the early years of the 21st century have witnessed a serious and major decline in sports participation amongst young people, a rise in obesity amongst children which has far-reaching health consequences, and a social environment where physical inactivity is or should be a growing political priority for governments. So today this session provides us with a wake-up call, and it's important that the Congress gets off to a strong start, and with our speakers I'm sure it will. The first speaker, Tim Armstrong, is regrettably unable to attend for health reasons, but we have no fewer than 4 speakers in his place. I'm delighted his presentation will be made by Wendy Brown from the School of Human Movement Studies at the University of Queensland in Australia. And assisting her in the form of a panel will be Brian Martin, Physical Activity and Health Branch of the Swiss Federal Institute of Sport, Pekka Oja from the UKK Institute in Tampere, Finland, and the Karolinska Institute in Stockholm, Sweden, and Stuart Biddle from the School of Sport and Exercise Sciences from Lund University. And they're all going to pick up on some of the themes that Wendy is going to make in her presentation. So without further ado, Wendy, the floor is yours.
My apologies to all of you from Tim Armstrong, who's been taken ill in Switzerland and unable to join us. And what I'm going to do this morning is present Tim's slides on his behalf. So please forgive me if I struggle a little between slides, because I only saw them for the first time at 1 o'clock this morning. So we're going to talk about physical activity and young people, and particularly about the World Health Organization Global Strategy on Diet, Physical Activity and Health, which Tim manages. Tim's prepared the talk in 4 parts. The first, an overview of the problem, the response from the World Health Organization, and then looking at some key tools for implementation. So starting with the problem, many of you will be aware that the main causes of death worldwide fall into several categories, which is described on this slide. I don't know how you can see this, but top right is cardiovascular diseases, 30%, then cancer, chronic respiratory disease, diabetes, injuries, and on this side, communicable diseases. So you can see that about 60% of the world's health problems are due to non-communicable diseases. And 35 million people died from chronic disease in 2005. So 60% of all illness around the world is really attributable to things that could potentially be changed. And in Malaysia, the situation is very much the same. The proportions you see on this slide are very similar to the last slide, which was the world estimates. A little bit higher cancer and chronic respiratory disease here in Malaysia, and communicable diseases accounting for 20% of the total burden of disease, with 80% of all illness attributable to preventable causes. Now, the causes of chronic disease are complex, and this is a complex slide, but starting on the left-hand side, you can see, of course, there are underlying socioeconomic, cultural, political, and environmental determinants of health, many of which relate to globalization, urbanization, and population aging. There are common modifiable risk factors: diet, physical inactivity, and tobacco, and some factors that we can't change, such as age and heredity. In turn, these factors lead to what we call intermediate risk factors of high blood pressure, high glucose, lipids, overweight and obesity, and in turn these factors lead to the major chronic diseases: heart disease, stroke, cancer, chronic respiratory disease, and diabetes. And these common risk factors of diet, inactivity, and tobacco use account for about 1.9 million deaths every year. And the intermediate risk factors account for 2.6 million deaths per year. So you can see, if we could intervene at the point of the common modifiable risk factors, we may be able to have an effect on chronic disease. Now, deaths worldwide in 2000 can be attributed to 10 leading risk factors. And you can see at the top of this slide, the main one is blood pressure, followed closely by tobacco, then cholesterol, underweight, unsafe sex, which relates to HIV/AIDS, and then this cluster of factors in the middle: fruit and vegetable intake, high body mass index, and physical activity, which together account for more of the burden of disease than tobacco or blood pressure. So this constellation of factors of diet and physical inactivity together are the most important risk factors for chronic disease. Now, physical activity is, of course, a fundamental means of improving physical and mental health. And it's not only physical health that activity can help, the things you saw on the previous slides: cardiovascular disease, cancer, diabetes, but also mental health is improved by physical activity. And you can find more information about this on this WHO website. Now, physical inactivity around the world is increasing. Once upon a time, people used to walk from place to place. They're increasingly spending more and more time in cars. And many of that time, particularly as I noted around Kuala Lumpur 2 days ago, sitting still in cars for many hours. And physical inactivity is increasing in the workplace, where people used to spend long hours each day toiling in fields or in work in which they were standing or on their feet all day. Increasingly, people are spending a lot of time sitting at work, sitting to and from work, sitting for maybe 8, 9 hours a day, sitting again travelling back from work, and sitting again in the evening watching television. This is in developed countries, and I guess increasingly so in developing countries. So if we look now to children, these are students aged 13 to 15, in a global survey which Tim carried out in 2003 and 2007, you can see the proportion of students who were physically active for at least 60 minutes a day, which is the recommended amount of physical activity for children and adolescents. In China, in Beijing and Wuhan, 21% and 14.6% of children are meeting that guideline of 60 minutes per day. And in the Philippines, the proportion is only 2.8%. Now, in these countries, the figures are much lower than in developed countries such as Australia and Great Britain, where we would be looking at, say, 50–60% of children meeting that guideline. But these are very low figures of children being physically active. And if we have a look at the proportion of students who are sitting for more than 3 hours